you very much, Andrew, for your time and effort. I can understand it's late in the evening and everything that you are doing for the community, it's really appreciated. Thank you very much. Over to you. Maybe you can quickly start the discussion.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you so much for having me, Rakesh. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. It's an honor to speak with you today. I'll do a quick introduction to myself, and then I'll get to the agenda, which is a Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management topic. So really quickly, once again, my name is Andrew Lensack. I've been working in the Dynamics space since about 2008. I started off actually as an end user working for a manufacturer, starting off in the UK and then returning to the US headquarters. So I spent quite a bit of time there as a business analyst and specialist in manufacturing before moving into the partner channel and becoming a consultant and later solution architect and manager in the partner channel space. I'm certified in multiple versions. I actually started as an end user in 3.0, Exapta 3.0, worked in 4.0, 2009, but I am certified in AX 2012 over trade and logistics, finance, discrete lean manufacturing, and as well as supply chain and management and manufacturing for D365. I also became a Microsoft certified trainer this year for the first time, and I spent a lot of time in the Dynamic Communities user group where I've presented in some of their regional chapters, as well as Summit, and have received the Granite and All-Star Award for the user groups, which is a place where I found a lot of help as an end user and a partner in events like this. So I think it's really important to share that knowledge and to learn from each other, which is why I'm here today. And that's to talk about a supply chain topic. So my agenda is 5 different order delivery forms in Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management. So the main focus here really is order fulfillment. When customers call and you need to, as a customer service representative, figure out how to promise inventory, or you're a functional consultant or a solution architect configuring the system, and you need to figure out which forms are going to represent the different options for presenting those different challenges that the businesses face. How do they figure out ship and receipt dates? How do they figure out what inventory to purchase or to manufacture, or even to transfer between their warehouses? It looks like there's a question. Go ahead. Maybe not. So the 5 forms I'm going to show are available to promise, and I actually snuck in a bonus form. So we're going to talk about delivery alternatives with that as well. We're also going to talk about the net requirements form for planners, the supply schedule, using your planned orders, and explosion. And this is really just a small sample size of what's available in D365, but all of these are going to show you ways that you can figure out how to perform that order fulfillment and come up with your optimal delivery and supply options. So I'll quickly walk through slides. These are mostly for reference. I actually want to spend time in a demo system showing examples of these. I'll make sure these are available to be sent out as well. But the first form we're going to talk about is called available to promise. This is actually something you can do on order entry or any time from the item. And the purpose of this is it's a delivery date control method. So it's helping customer service or who's ever entering or reviewing orders calculate the actual ship and receipt dates on those sales orders using information from the system. So using on-hand data and using open order data, the calendars in the system, because there's actually many calendars. Customers, I think, sometimes don't realize how many calendars you can have in the system. You can have calendars for specific customers, for specific vendors, for specific carriers and modes of delivery. Your warehouses might have different calendars because there might be different days of the week they operate in different states or different regions or countries. So all of that can feed into ultimately when you can promise inventory to a customer when they place a sales order. So we'll actually look at examples of these in D365, entering an order and seeing what ATP does. And essentially what ATP is it's trying to show you what the uncommitted inventory balance is, or when you can actually fulfill that uncommitted inventory balance. So if we have on hand and we have purchase orders or production orders adding to our on hand, and then we also have customer sales orders that are ultimately going to decrement or reduce our on hand, we want to figure out when we can promise any inventory at the time of order entry. And that's what ATP is trying to do. It's looking at that data and coming up with a specific date for your customer with a limited time frame that you specify. And that's generally going to be the longest lead time that you would ever promise a customer. If 90 days is the longest you would ever promise them, then you would set a 90-day time fence, and ATP would calculate over that time. And if it can't find inventory or sufficient supply, it would just automatically set your ship date at that 90 days. So we'll look at examples of that, how to actually fulfill that ATP quantity or the uncommitted inventory balance during your period. The third screen we'll show is the net requirement screen. This is your all-in-one planning screen, or sorry, the second screen. I guess the delivery alternatives as the bonus will be the second, and this will be the third. So this is one that's really important for planners. This gives you kind of a dashboard over the entire item's outlook. And I've kind of highlighted different sections of this form that are really important. The first one is, what plan are you using? Because you might have multiple master plans. You might have simulation plans, operational plans, forecast plans. You might be using dynamic and static plans that are looking at different information. So the first one is, what plan am I reviewing or analyzing for this item? The second set of information is, we can separate plans by warehouse. Maybe every warehouse is planned separately. So I want to see what's in warehouse 21 and warehouse 24 separately, because they might produce separately to different plans. And I can see that both actually are made via planned production orders. We don't buy this item from vendors, we produce it. And I can see other information about this item, like the coverage group or the minimum inventory level. So right away, I'm starting to get setup information that tells me how this item is planned and why I might be getting demand. And as I scroll across the other tabs, I'll get other pieces of information, like item coverage would show me the full configuration of that item, if there's lead times on it, who the vendor may be, for example, something like that. The summary tab would show you aggregate information. In total, how many production orders do I have? In total, how many sales orders do I have, or the quantity at least against this item? And then period would be looking at supply and demand in different time buckets. Maybe you want to see weekly or monthly or yearly. And then in our third and fourth section, this is where we get the detailed information. I'm seeing granular transactions, a line for my on-hand quantities, one line each for all of my transfer orders and sales orders that are decrementing inventory. So we see negative quantities. And then we see production orders or purchase orders, or even inventory journals that will add to inventory. So this form is giving us that aggregate and summary information that's really important for long-term planning. And then it's giving us the really granular information, our day-to-day orders, what is actually contributing to our overall plan. And it will even give us other things like the dates and perhaps proposals for master planning on what to do with some of those orders, like cancel them because the demand is gone, or postponing or bringing in dates, advancing and postponing dates based on shifts in your supply plan. So there's a lot of information we'll see in net requirements, and we'll look at some examples in the system of this as well. And then another form that's really good that we will look at. This is for maybe longer term planning, or maybe not at the item level, but the item family level, using a supply schedule. A supply schedule will show you both mathematical or specific data points. We'll see the numerical data, and we'll also see graphical data. So it's a really good form, out of the box standard form that shows you multiple views. Very often you have to use Power BI or create your own charts, but this is one good form that shows you a little bit of both views. And what it's doing is it's checking your projected inventory over a certain time frame. So we can actually see starting and ending balances for either a specific item or item families, and in any type of time bucket we want. So once again, maybe I want to see daily buckets for the short term, and then weekly buckets, and then monthly buckets. It will show me my backlog. It will show me those daily supply and demand aggregate information, how many total sales orders, how many total production orders and purchase orders, and then it will net that out at all of those different time intervals and show us what our projected inventory levels should be. So something we're always doing as, procurement planners and production planners, and putting in daily meetings for our managers. Here we have that information in one form in Dynamics that we can use. The other form we're going to use is the output of master planning, planned orders. What are we planning to purchase, to transfer, and to make? What is the importance of this form? How should I use this form? It's very overwhelming a lot of times for planners when they're seeing this for the first time, if they're coming from a different ERP or maybe no ERP at all, because it's very likely you're going to have thousands and thousands of planned orders, especially the further out your time fences go, the longer your lead times are, the higher your volumes are. So the important thing to know is how to use this form. How do we limit it to just the data we need to see? What are the important things we need to focus on? And the main thing is knowing the right filters, buyer groups, using the order date rather than the delivery date, priority fields, or even segregating by vendor if we have different buyers or planners that are responsible for different vendors. And then the other two things is understanding how to read where this demand comes from, looking at the pegging in your planned orders and netting it against the net requirements form. How does this overall affect our supply and demand for this item? And then the final form we'll look at in Dynamics 365 is the explosion form. This is a really good form, especially in the example of an ATP or even a CTP, a capable to promise to actually explode all the way through a bill of materials and show you how an order is going to be fulfilled. If I have a planned batch order or a planned production order, are the raw materials being fulfilled by current on-hand inventory? Do they have open purchase orders? And if so, what are the confirmed delivery dates of those purchase orders? And if not, if I don't have any orders, then we'll get a planned purchase order. So anything that's bold, that's an unplanned order. That we know that those are the shortages we need to fulfill. So the intent of that explosion is showing what lines or what levels of the assembly essentially are already fulfilled, what are going to be fulfilled and when, and what are not fulfilled yet. So understanding how to configure that form and read that data is really important because it ultimately can give you that full picture of rolling up a produced item and when it will fulfill a sales order. And the other great thing about an explosion is you can view upstream and downstream. So I can start at the lowest level component, see what sub-level BOM it goes into, which might then go into a finished good, which ultimately goes to a sales order. So I can see from that raw material all the way up to that sales order, or I can go to the sales order and get all the way back down 10 levels deep on a BOM to find what is that missing piece, what is that missing raw material that's going to prevent me from hitting my customer sales order delivery date. So the explosion form is another really important form in D365. So with that in mind, let's actually go into the system and take a look at all of these orders. So we're going to start first with the ATP. So I'm going to go to a sales order and I'm going to enter a new line, and we'll talk about how ATP can help you figure out a customer sales order date. Just going to go one sales order up to my demo customer here. So the important thing to remember for delivery date control is it can be done both at the header level and at the line level. If I click on the cell tab here at the top, I have confirmed delivery dates under the calculation section. And so my sales order happens to be one line, but if I had multiple lines, this would essentially allow me to configure settings that dictate how I'm going to update the header. How am I going to update that ship date on the sales order header? So is there a cutoff date that I'm going to accept where if we exceed it, it's just going to set it as a cutoff 30 days, 60 days, whatever it may be? And if not, what are the delivery date control methods? So what I'm focusing on is ATP, but you can see there's lots of other ways to calculate your ship and receipt dates. You might just quote a standard sales lead time. When I was a planner in AX many years ago, my company just really was, we considered ourselves a catalog company. Everything had a quoted lead time. We were essentially producing to stock. So we would just put in average sales lead time. So no matter what sales order went in, it was, let's say, 10 days from the date the order was entered. Whereas ATP is doing the calculation of what are our current on-hand levels, what supply is coming in, what other demand has already committed inventory. So we'll look at ATP. You can see, do we allow multiple deliveries? So in the case of a multi-line order, do we want a ship complete where we're going to calculate these all to the same ship date? Or do we allow multiple deliveries where we might have multiple ship dates? And then are we actually updating the dates themselves when we run this calculation? So that's how we would run it from the header. If we wanted to run it for one line, we would do that from the delivery tab. And you can see there's a delivery date control option of ATP. So this sales line right here already has a requested ship date. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a second one, and we'll look at what happens when this is calculated. So we're going to put in a line for the same item. We'll leave it at 300 liters. We'll make sure that it's in Site 2, Warehouse 24. And we'll see what ship date it came up with. So our current date right now, at least in my time zone, is the 19th, 20th in India. And we can see the requested ship date has been set for 11/21 with an offset of a receipt date of 30. So typically that means there's a transport time associated with this. We're shipping it on 11/21 and the customer would be receiving it on 11/30, perhaps because of a transport time for shipping via ground. If we wanted to actually see how the system calculated ATP, there's a couple ways to do that. So one is using the simulate delivery dates because I've already selected that as my delivery date control option. And that would actually just show you what the current calculation is. So we already saw that it requests ship date of 11/21. This item only has this lead time of 1 day. I could toggle between different modes of delivery, like if the customer really wanted to ship it via air or customer pickup, that might affect my calculation. I could change that and see if any of the dates update. And this one actually would. It would change it just slightly. And I could update the confirmed ship date and the requested ship date, or I could cancel out, but you can see some of that information right here. So we'll update the confirmed ship date. That's one view. It doesn't really, though, tell us why it came to that calculation. It just shows us the date. So the really cool thing about ATP is from the product and supply menu and viewing the ATP information. What this is going to do is it's actually going to show you what that ATP quantity currently is. So my ATP quantity right now is 336 units. If I take an order right now for 336 units or less, I can commit that inventory. So that's why we had a ship date almost immediately. I have a small warehouse transfer time, which is why it was essentially next day for 11/21. But any order that was greater than 336, you can see the ATP is not over that. So it wouldn't promise that. And what this is always going to show me is what open orders are actually coming in on what dates and how that affects both my on hand and my available to promise quantity. So we can see on 11/24, I do have 150 units more coming in, and I also have 300 units shipping out. So it's going to affect my on hand. And the further out I look, I might have additional quantities as well. So I have additional receipts and issues going out later in the month. So the ATP is going to show that netting, and it's always going to tell you that ATP quantity. What is the quantity that I can commit on that day? The other cool thing about it is I can start to manipulate this information. What happens if the customer wants a larger order? Okay, great. You can ship 300 almost immediately. When can you ship 900? So I would change that quantity and I would recalculate, and it would essentially come up with a new date for me. So ATP is a really powerful method for those users to come up with their ship and receipt dates. The next form we're going to look at is the net requirements. So I could actually do that if I wanted to also from here, from the sales order. So if I'm a customer service representative and I click on that product and supply button, you can actually see there is a net requirements view right here. That is one way to do it. Typically, planners are going to do it from our items, but I did it here from the sales order. And once again, we can toggle between different plans. So I want to look at my static plan, and I want to look at warehouse 24. So as I showed in the slides, lots of different information that can be looked at. Here I want to see what the setup of the item is. Okay, we plan a year out, so I know automatically if anybody asks me for a sales order more than 365 days out, the system isn't reviewing it. Any forecast past that date, the system doesn't see it. We have a limited time fence. I can also see that there's a period coverage group of 7 days. So ultimately what that means, if I had 2 planned orders within the same 7 days, it would have grouped them. So maybe I had a sales order for 500 pieces for tomorrow. I had another sales order for 500 pieces the day after that. I'd get a planned order for 1,000 pieces instead of 2 planned orders for 500 each. I can see further information, my calendar, my multiples, my minimums, standard lot quantities, and then I have that summary tab. So down below, I have my granular information, my actual transactions and their order numbers. But here I can quickly see, okay, total forecast, I have 2,100. Total expected receipts from inventory, so that's probably an inventory journal, 500. Total purchase order quantity is 150. Total production orders over 1,000, sales orders over 2,000, and so on, rather than looking at all the individual transactions. So really powerful to see that really quickly as well. And then the period is showing it in different time buckets. So I can actually see my current backlog quantities, what the delta is, my projected available inventory at the end of today, and then also my projected available inventory on future dates as well. So here I'm looking at single days for the rest of the week. And then after that, I'm actually looking at weekly buckets for the next month, and then monthly buckets for the rest of the year. So I can tell right now that at the end of the year, 12/31/2022, we don't expect to have any inventory. We actually expect to be waiting on receipts to meet our open demand. So we can quickly see what our inventory levels would be if all the current open transactions were to take place. Then we have our line information. We can quickly go to details. So I see this transfer order shipment is out there for March 31st. I can click on that order and then go right into the details of that individual granular order. So that net requirement screen allows me to navigate and get quickly to the orders after I see the summary information. So now here I am, I'm on the transfer order, and I can review that and make sure those dates are up to date. So this one, for example, the ship date on the line is 3/31. The ship date on the header is 3/4. So if I had multiple lines, I could repopulate those dates. The other thing with transfer orders is you have the ability to do some calculation around them as well. So that net requirement screen, if I go back to it, we've now looked at a lot of different pieces of information, and you can continue to drill down. I can actually see which customer the sales order is without even having to leave this screen. So there's lots of information. This is typically the place planners will spend the most of their time because they can see all the information as detailed as you want or as high level as you want. And I did that right from the sales order. I could have gotten there right from the item. So we've looked at ATP and net requirements just from this one screen. It's really probably 3 or 4 forms rather than 2. And the other one I wanted to show is the bonus form, which is delivery alternatives. All the forms I showed previously were available in versions, even prior to D365, AX 2012 had those forms. The delivery alternatives form is a brand new one for D365. And the intent of this is to show you essentially all the different ways this order could be fulfilled. I entered the order and all the defaults took place. That might have been a default warehouse for the customer. It might have been a default warehouse for that item, and it automatically dropped in those ship and receipt dates. But maybe I want to look at a form and see all my options for how I can fulfill this order. So for example, including partial shipments, including later dates, changing my mode of delivery, including purchase orders, if there are some. And it's now going to tell me what other options there are. So I can actually see there is inventory in this warehouse. This is my current option for fulfilling this sales order. There's also a purchase order coming in from an external vendor. So rather than fulfilling inventory, if that inventory is committed elsewhere, is there a purchase order coming in that could fulfill this order? And there is at a later date. But there's also inventory in another warehouse. Now, this one isn't optimal because that ship date is much, much later, but I can see that there is an option to fulfill it out of another warehouse as well, which is warehouse 21. And as I select those different options, it's actually going to populate information down below. What is the impact of if I change my sales order line to this different option? So if I change it to this external vendor, my ship date changes to 12/6 and my receipt date changes to 12/8. If I move it to the inventory in an additional warehouse, it's showing that it's actually not available and even showing me an ATP, not a very useful one, but it is showing me an ATP graph and then showing me the impact of that delivery to push that all the way back out to 5/19/2023. So if you do have multiple warehouses, you do have different ways of procuring items, transfer orders, purchase orders, and production orders, that delivery alternative screen can be very useful from a customer service perspective as well. So now we've looked at ATP, that helps us calculate ship dates. We've looked at net requirements, that helps us plan typically on a very detailed level, typically a daily level, but it also shows the long-term information as well. The other form I want to show is the supply schedule. So the supply schedule has been around at least since AX 2012, and the intent of the supply schedule is long-term planning typically, or item family planning, even though it can be viewed at an item level. So I'll start first with an item level, and then we'll show an item family. And as most planning forms are, we're going to pick a plan here. And we'll choose our same item. But you see, I could have chosen product family instead if I wanted to, and then I'll click OK. So what's quickly happening is it shows me what is my current inventory, 545 units, and what is my projected inventory at those different dates. So period ending inventory after today is 657 because I'm expected to net an additional 112. So it's actually showing me the incoming and outgoing inventory. It's showing it in daily buckets, and then it's showing it in weekly buckets and monthly buckets. So just like we saw in the master planning screen. But what I didn't show in the master planning screen was this is just one example. I've actually configured those time buckets. Your company or your view might want to be different. So if I were to click modify filter, you can see I have something called a period template set. And that period template is what allows you to set up all of those different time buckets. So I could actually set up a new one just for this legal entity. It's like I need to create a new name because someone else also called one test. And we can start to actually apply different periods. So do I want daily buckets, weekly buckets, monthly buckets, quarterly buckets? We'll start with a really simple one. So we'll go ahead and we'll create monthly buckets. And we can actually see the effect that would have. So this is starting on today's date. I could have put a fixed start like a Monday or start of the year, something like that, and that would affect that calculation a little bit. Now we'll go back and we will change that period template. And you can see the effect right there on my supply schedule. So now I'm quickly viewing just monthly buckets. So what is my starting and ending inventory? What is my additional demand? What is my additional supply? And I can view out all the way to the end of that horizon. I can also view this in graphical form. So what is the change? Can I export this and start to add trend lines and really add value to the business, not just by looking at the raw data, but also looking at more strategic things, what's happening in the long term. So a supply schedule, once again, new to AX 2012 and D365, but really powerful for the aggregate information. What are we doing in the long term when we have those planning meetings on a weekly basis? Are we planning at that item family level? So here's one single item, but now I want to look at an entire family because maybe we have an inventory target that we're looking to achieve or sales that we're looking to achieve for a particular family of items. Here I can change my item allocation key. And now we're actually seeing this data for a group of items, not just an individual item, which is also a really, really powerful tool. Okay. Let's see, we have a question here. What is period end pegged inventory and supply schedule? So let's go back to make sure we're looking at the right field that you're asking about. So let me just add back in my item. Period end pegged inventory. Yeah. So here we had a starting inventory of 545 and an ending in 657. We obviously had to add inventory to that, but there was also a lot of demand. So that's really going to be what is still on hand at the end of this date, but pegged to demand. So actually it's on hand, but essentially not necessarily hard allocated, but it is accumulated up to demand. So it's expected to be coming out of your inventory essentially after that date. So that supply schedule can be viewed both at the item level and the item family level, as I showed. These are all planning forms primarily. The first one we did kind of a customer service view, starting with the sales order to see the ATP information. But the net requirements, the supply schedule, and here the planned orders, that will mostly be your planners on a day-to-day basis. So as I mentioned, what happens typically, customers start to get very overwhelmed when they see this form for the first time if they're not used to dynamics. You have all your different plans. So most important thing, am I in the right plan? There may be lots of different plans. A lot of companies will use a multi-plan setup because you might want to have a plan that looks at all transactions. You might want to have a plan that just looks at a forecast to level load production. You might have a plan that looks at quotes and you want to see how that will affect your total operational plan. But typically you have one specific plan that you're actually planning against, firming orders against, and using as your real plan. So first things first, make sure you're in the right plan. The next thing is your filters. I always recommend filtering by order date because it doesn't necessarily matter when it's showing up. It matters when I need to place the order. So what are the orders I need to place right now or should have placed already? So filter off your order date and then you can focus on the real urgent orders. That being said, that is a very traditional master planning mindset or master planning approach, which is what Dynamics has always done. If we start to get into things like DDMRP, demand-driven MRP, where priority isn't always date-driven, there are other fields we can look at as well. But typical approach or best recommendation, filter by order date, right? What do I need to order first? Then what is the buyer group? Traditionally, if we're implementing master planning in Dynamics, we would set up a buyer group that represents what items we're responsible for. So filtered by the buyer group that you're responsible for, that limits the amount of orders that show up in your form, and you can focus on what you need to firm up. How do we set up same items that are produced and purchased for MRP? So really good question. That would typically be done from the item. It wasn't one of the forms in the slides, but what I'll show you quickly is where that would be set up. Because typically, if you're setting that up for purchasing and production, that's going to be two different locations you're doing that for rather than both in the same. So that would be done in what's called item coverage. Your default order settings would have your default order type. Is it produced or is it purchased? But here in your item coverage, you can override that. So let's say I had two different facilities, one that makes it and the other one that buys it. I would set up a record for both of those items here, and I would override the default planned order type for the facility that's not producing or not buying it. So here on site 2, warehouse 24, you can see the planned order type is production, but maybe this is the facility that purchases that order. Now that I've split that up. So site 1, warehouse 11 is producing it. Site 2, warehouse 24 is purchasing it. So now they can procure it different ways. And that can be set up at whatever level you plan at. Most people plan at the warehouse level. If you plan at the site level, everything would be accumulated up to the site. All right, so back in the planned orders, I've filtered on order date. I've filtered on buyer group. You might also filter on vendor if you're only responsible for particular vendors. That's a really easy way to filter only on orders that are available for you. And then finally, we also have a field called the priority. So a priority is a field that you might see. You can see here there's planning priority. This comes now with DDMRP and planning optimization. So if you'd rather look at the highest priority, which is typically the lowest number, then you could look at that instead of the dates. Here, since I clicked into this particular planned order, I have the pegging. This is actually showing me why I got a planned order. I had this planned production order to make this laser projector, and it's already past due. So why did I get that order? And it's actually because there's an outstanding sales order. Shame on me and my demo environment. Sales order is supposed to ship about 5 years ago, but it's because there is outstanding demand for that sales order. So it's actually showing me what this planned production order was derived from, which is a customer sales order. And from there, I could even go and view further information like the net requirements or the last form I wanted to show, which is the explosion. So the explosion is a really powerful form. As I mentioned, you can view upstream and downstream. So here what we're seeing is we need to make a laser projector for that sales order that we saw in the pegging. So we have a planned production order, but underneath it, we have all the components that make up this laser projector. Now, unfortunately for us, we don't have any of them in stock. So we see everything is bolded, but what we can see is there's planned purchase orders already generated for them. So there's a planned purchase order for the laser, for the lens. There's a planned Kanban for the power supply, so we use lean manufacturing for that. There's a planned transfer for the plastic case. The good thing is, look, we don't have a shortage on one line, at least for the transfer that we need. That plastic case does have a production order that is firmed up, so that's why that one isn't bolded, because it's not a planned order. If it's a planned order, it's bolded to highlight what are those critical shortages. If something's already scheduled or it's a purchase order that's firmed, it wouldn't be bolded. And then ideally, we have something on hand. We would see that an order or a line was fulfilled by the on hand. So here I can figure out what all my shortages are. I could change my explosion view, and that's essentially going to look, okay, where did this planned production order come from? It came from the sales order. So here I simply look at my derived sales order. If I want to go back down, then I'm exploding all the way through the bill of materials to say, how am I actually going to produce this laser projector? And here, obviously, I have a lot of planning to do because I haven't purchased my materials yet, or done a transfer, but I have scheduled at least one production order for the plastic case. So we have our explosion form that's really powerful as well. So let me just grab the screen back here. So to kind of quickly recap there, we have 5 different forms that we've shown. We had the ATP, which can be looked at from a sales order. What I didn't show, it can actually be looked at from an item as well. That's really critical for our CSRs and our sales enters. We have delivery alternatives, which can be configured to show alternate sources of fulfilling customer sales orders, like our transfer orders, alternate vendors, or alternate modes of delivery. We have our planner forms, the net requirements, and the supply schedule, which are good for viewing current and future projected inventory in different time buckets, even with graphical displays. You have your execution screen, which is your planned orders, and then the explosion, which is viewing all the upstream and downstream demand for viewing the exploded bill of materials and fulfilling those shortages. Looks like we got a couple questions. I'm not sure how much time we have left, Rakesh, but I'm happy to take those. The first one being, can we get end-to-end tracking of batch and serial numbers once material is delivered? So yes, there is batch, lot, and serial control and dynamics that is available and can be tracked throughout the system if you do want to record it at all those different levels. So you can absolutely do that. Mahara's question, the best way to factor in seasonality during forecasting. There is a couple different ways. So there's the manual forecasting where you add kind of seasonality factors, percentages to skew a baseline. So let's say we forecast 1,000 units every month, but we want to go up some months and down some months. We can do that. Or we can use the Azure Machine Learning demand forecasting functionality, which does have time series forecasting for seasonality as well. So that would be your best bet for that one, definitely. But yes, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. Here is my contact information and enjoy the next session.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a wonderful and informative session. And I must say that this kind of information, the way you presented, is very rare and very commendable. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
If you ask me, Andrew, I don't recall where I have seen such type of information presented by any Dynamics 365 SCM consultant, in such an easy to understand manner, right? I really appreciate that. And then that I like that theme of 5 minutes, 5 form, and you covered everything to be understood by any SCM consultant, right? And I personally seen when I try to interact with the customer in the beginning phase of the program, maybe in the blueprinting phase, and they're pretty new to Dynamics 365 SCM because they came from a legacy background or some other ERP. I think this sort of information is really, really helpful rather than explaining that go and navigate to learn path, go and navigate to this path, right? But this is really informative. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time and effort, Andrew.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm very appreciative that it was helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.